Um, for those I haven't met, I'm Melinda Menente, Continuous Improvement Manager at GBMP, and I'm joined today by Dan Fleming, President of GBMP, and Scott Govan, co-founder of the Respect for People Roadmap. We are really glad to have you with us for this first session. This is the first in 5-part series on building the conditions for continuous improvement. And it's a topic that sits underneath so much of the work that we do. We can have the right tools, methods, improvement strategies, but creating an environment where people consistently participate and speak up and solve problems and contribute what they know, that's a totally different challenge. So that's what we're going to explore together in this 5-part series, and we're excited to get started with you today. I'll hand it over to Dan.
Thank you, Melinda, and thank you everyone for being here. We know that despite investment in improvement activities and understanding what a continuous improvement culture should look like, a lot of organizations still struggle. They struggle to get that world-class level, that Shingo Prize level, but there's still remaining questions and remaining concerns. And some examples are, how do you improve quality of execution and engagement across the entire organization versus in pockets? How do you get the organization, not just leaders and change agents, to participate in improvement without ops or CI pushing every step of the way? How do you create an organization where people willingly contribute what they know? How do you create the self-reinforcing engine that is the culture of continuous improvement? And why aren't our methods and tools we already know and use enough? These are some of the questions we're trying to explore to get to the depth of how to create that culture, that sustainable culture. Most organizations are clear about the kind of conditions they want to cultivate. They've implemented the tools, some of the routines, they've identified leadership practices, and maybe even operating systems intended to support the desired outcome. Unfortunately, those conditions don't automatically emerge simply because those things are in place. For example, knowing what psychological safety is not the same as knowing how to create it. A Gemba walk does not create trust simply because a leader walked by and asked questions, and problem solving does not become uh, the objective simply because a team is using an A3. So there's a deep culture that needs to be created to get the most out of an A3, the most out of a Gemba walk, the most out of creating a psychological safe environment. And the same pattern shows up across many other principles and practices we associate with CI. And so if you've joined us today, you've likely already come to this conclusion and are already looking for something more specific, or more specifically at where and how these conditions are actually built. As many of you attended maybe Shingo workshops are actually very helpful to help create a mindset and behavior for improvement. And many of the Shingo Prize winning organizations, they do have a culture of continuous improvement. When you walk through, you can feel it, you can see it. And then obviously you'd like to bottle that up and bring it back to your own organization. When you go back to your own organization, it's obviously hard because there's long-standing habits, long-standing behaviors in place that are preventing the principles and the systems to reach their full potential. So that's what today and the next few sessions are about. So the Respect for People roadmap is the clearest answer to that question that we found. Our goal in these series is was to give leaders invested in building the culture of continuous improvement an opportunity to learn more about what it really takes and what it looks like in practice, and how accessible it really is when approached systematically. Today, Melinda and I will be talking to Scott Govanev. Melinda already shared. He's co-founder of the Respect for People roadmap. Scott will be sharing the client experience that made him rethink what he thought he knew about continuous improvement and the framework that we're about to present, and how the discrepancy between how we're taught to cultivate continuous improvement and how common solutions are designed to go about it inspire the development of this particular learning experience. So just setting the stage for what we're about to learn, and I'm going to hand it back to Melinda.
Speaking of gaps, and thank you, Dan. Before you joined today, we invited all of you to take our organizational friction assessment. And you want to keep the results handy as we'll be discussing those later in our session today. We see the results of that assessment as the distance between what your current state is in the operation and what you're trying to build. This assessment gives us a way to begin seeing that distance, not simply by asking whether the desired conditions exist, but by looking at the day-to-day pattern of behavior that shape them. And if you haven't taken it yet, we highly recommend that you do. It's a great first look at your organization's prevailing interpersonal sources of organizational friction. This example that we're showing here, the 4 out of 10 score, shows us that this is an organization that's struggling with consistent execution. Friction in communication, coordination, leadership, and decision making is making that work harder than it needs to be. So I know many of us can imagine or are currently working in this kind of environment and know the kind of challenge of trying to establish and develop it very well. In fact, it was Scott's experience of navigating this kind of environment that brought us here today. And with that, I'd like Scott to share that experience with us.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan and Melinda. I'm really glad to be here. My story really goes back probably about 20 years. I was in China. I was right in the middle of a global operational transformation that actually stretched across about 5 countries, and I was chest deep in what I would now call operational friction. At the time, though I didn't see it that way, I saw it more as like resistance. I saw people just kind of resisting what I was trying to do. Um, but from that, I was looking at it from that conventional improvement standpoint, and I thought I had everything I needed. I had the tools, I had the authority, I had the support, I had the plan. I even had a translator. But the one thing I didn't have was people's participation. I just couldn't get people to engage, and I couldn't understand why. Now, this wasn't, my first time. This wasn't my first rodeo. It wasn't the first time I had run into this kind of resistance. I had dealt with that plenty of times before, but this was different because the tactics I normally relied on they just weren't working very well. Um, and not speaking the language made that even that much more difficult for me. Normally, when I ran into this kind of situation, I would just push a little harder. I'd make the business case. I'd reinforce the expectations. I'd lean on the plan, the logic, and I'd just try to talk through why it's important to do the things that we're doing. I might even lean into the authority behind it and try to work through that resistance. And that's pretty much what I tried to do in that project. Um, so for about 6 months, I kept doing what I knew how to do, the things that I was successful at in the past, kind of following that up. I'm from Boston, so I know how to grind. And so I just kept pushing. And eventually, the young engineer who was assigned to me and who was supposed to be learning from me pulled me aside to actually teach me the lesson that has turned everything around for me, and basically said, here's the problem. You don't have guanchi. Now, I had assumed that because the strategy made sense and because I had the authority and responsibility to lead it, that people just would participate, that I could maybe compel people to participate. But what I hadn't earned yet was the relational standing to credibly ask them to change. In China, that idea is captured in this concept of guanxi. It's the connection, the trust, the credibility, all of those things that add up to the social currency that make cooperation and mutual obligation kind of possible. And what my translator was helping me see was that I was trying to make withdrawals before I had made enough deposits. Yes, I certainly had the authority. I had the responsibility. I had the strategy. I had developed the strategy. But what I didn't have yet was enough trust and relational credibility for people to want to move with me through that journey. Once I understood that, I started approaching the situation a little differently, and really that changed the level of participation. Um, and it changed the trajectory of the work that I was doing. Um, that experience changed the way I thought about improvement in general. I already understood that there was a technical side and a relational side. That wasn't new to me. And for most of us, I think that's probably common knowledge. We're told that there's, in Lean, there's a continuous improvement side to the model and a respect for people side of the model. And they're often referred to as those two pillars. But what changed for me was how much weight I started giving that relational side. So in China, I had a name for this thing called guanxi that made that dimension a lot more visible to me. Up until then, most of my improvement work had been focused on really on the left side, on that technical side, the methods, the standards, the processes, the plan. What I wasn't paying nearly enough attention to was the environment side, or the people side, or the people who were operating in that mode. And so I wasn't really paying attention to what they expected from one another, or how they interacted, or how they responded when someone tried to do something differently. And that became a really important realization for me. The technical dimension creates the potential for improvement, but the relational dimension has a huge influence on whether that potential ever turns into action, and whether that technical change can ever actually be sustained. So once I started looking at improvement this way, the next question became, where do these two dimensions actually come together? And the answer is at the point of execution. That's the moment where the work is actually happening. It's where someone decides whether to raise a problem or to stay quiet, whether to ask for help or work around something, whether to follow the new standard or fall back to what they already know and what they've always done. This is the point where technical knowledge meets the reality of the environment where people are working in. They may know exactly what they're supposed to do, but whether they actually do it is influenced by what they expect is going to happen when they actually move forward to act. So this is really the point of value creation, but it's also the point where improvement either happens or, in many cases, doesn't happen. And so the andon cord is a really good example of this. We've talked about andon cords many times, but it's such a great example of where both of these things come together. We tend to think of it as a technical mechanism. Someone knows, when to pull it. They know maybe how to pull it, and there's a process that when it gets pulled, that happens next, and a whole bunch of things kind of start to come together. But that's only half of what determines whether it actually gets used. The other half is the person's experience of the environment. What do they expect is going to happen if they stop the line? Are they going to be supported? Are they going to be blamed? Are they going to get yelled at? Are they going to create a problem for someone else? Have they seen other people get punished for speaking up or for pulling the cord? So in that moment, the technical side and the relational side are coming together. They may know exactly what the standard says to do. They know the method and the process. The real question is whether the environment gives them enough confidence to act on what they know, to act on the maybe expectations, because they know what the reaction is going to be. They have an idea of or they might have an idea what that interaction should look like or will look like, because they've got that experience. That's why I think the andon cord is kind of this moment of truth for continuous improvement. It's the moment when the technical side and that relational side actually come together. So when I ran the concept of guanxi through kind of this andon example, it made me realize that just telling people what my expectation was wouldn't have resulted in everyone actually using or utilizing that andon cord. So this realization got me thinking about why someone might engage differently than they normally would. It got me thinking about what would they have to think, what would they have to feel, and what would they have to know about the environment to be able to confidently pull the andon cord. And so that moment, one person willing to stop the line is really the product of every condition we're talking about here. And so I think we're going to move into a breakout, right, to have a quick discussion about this, Melinda.
Right, Scott. So we'd like to pause to give you a moment to think about this and discuss this question. What would someone have to think, feel, and know about the environment to have confidence to pull that andon cord, to ask for help when there's a problem? I've put this question in your chat. If you click on that, it will become available to you. And I'm going to open up breakout rooms in Zoom for 5 minutes. When you come back, you don't have to, you don't need to be formal about this, but I am going to ask you to put into chat a summary of what you talked about. We'll be collecting your answers in chat, one category at a time. And we'll start with think, then know, and finally feel. And we'll prompt you for each category. So as you're talking about it, you can be taking your notes. And when we get back, we'll share what we've learned in chat. And here we go. Coming back in. I'll just ask you to re-put yourself on mute if you took yourself off mute for the conversation. That's a big help. All right, so let's go ahead and use the chat window. So the first question is, what would someone have to think about the environment to have confidence to pull the andon cord? What do you think, everyone? What would you have to think? Yeah, Matt says positive results. No consequence. Are they safe? Trust. Is it important enough to pull it? They found a defect. Are they doing the right thing? Is somebody going to listen to me? What language do we use when we react? How do leaders react? How is the team going to react? If I pull this cord, will anything change? These are great examples. Now let's move to how would someone have to feel about the environment to have the confidence to pull the andon cord? Yeah, safe, protected, comfortable, empowered. They'd have to feel trusted, supported, confident, heard, enabled. Wonderful, wonderful responses. And then the final question is, what would someone have to know about the environment to have the confidence to pull the andon cord? Yeah, they'd have to know who to ask for help. Great. They'd have to have timing, competence. If the other person was willing to listen, how to pull it, what would happen next? They'd have to know the process. They'd have to know there wouldn't be any consequences. They'd have to know what will happen, what results might occur, when to pull it. So you're really seeing that these three characteristics, think, feel, know, have a significant impact on the ability of an individual to have the behavior that's consistent with the continuous improvement practices. Scott, go ahead and take us from here.
All right. So, what I'm seeing in the answers is the same realization I eventually came to myself. At the point of execution, people don't act on just the technical knowledge alone. They're constantly reading the environment around them. How do I feel? Do I feel supported or taken for granted? How do I think people are going to respond if I speak up or do something differently? Am I going to be valued? Am I going to be criticized? Am I going to be ignored? And what do I know from experience? What have I seen happen to other people when they raise a concern or challenge something? So people, I think people take what they know technically and filter it through what they feel, think, and know about the environment, and then they decide what to do. That was a big shift for me because it meant that if we want different actions from people, we can't just focus on giving people better technical knowledge. We also have to pay attention to the environment those actions are happening in. And so that led me to the next realization. For me, improvement is a choice. In these everyday moments, people are constantly choosing what to do. Do I stay quiet or do I raise a concern? Do I work around the issue or coordinate with someone? Do I pass the problem along or do I ask for help? And every one of those choices either adds friction or reduces friction. But there's another layer to this too. The response to someone else's choice is another choice. If someone raises a concern, how do we respond? If someone challenges the status quo, do we get defensive or curious? If someone makes a mistake, do we use it against them or use it to learn? Those responses either make it more likely that people will engage again the next time, or maybe less likely. So when we talk about friction in an organization, a lot of it is really the accumulated effect of those everyday choices and responses. And your friction assessment is giving you kind of a glimpse into what those choices are and how it's showing up in your organization.
And
And I
so,
think, Linda, I'm going to kick it over to you again.
yeah, and so we'd like to ask, what choices are the most problematic in your organization and what kind of relational skills are needed in order to reduce friction? So let me put those questions here. So rather than go into breakout rooms, is that what you had planned, Scott, that we would just do this in a large?
Yeah, I think we could just, people can just drop their the things that they're choosing into the chat.
Yeah. So what choices are the most problematic at your organization? Would love to hear from you on that. And what kind of skills do you think you need in order to reduce friction? Yeah, where to spend money, what to share, what information. Thanks, Matthew and Kyle. Taking ownership of projects, not thinking or feeling what we're able to say. When or how to raise a concern, sticking to what's familiar, not celebrating wins.
Mm.
Yeah, these are really good. And now what kind of skills do you think are needed to reduce friction? Humility. Yeah, empathy. What else do you think people listening skills, relatability, confidence, openness to change, humbler inquiry? A really nice cross section there.
Yeah, there's some great things.
Yeah, great things. Thank you.
So this is where the idea starts to get a little bit bigger than any one intersection. Culture isn't separate from all of these everyday moments. It's kind of really the result of them. The way people interact, the way work gets done reflects the conditions that already exist. But at the same time, those interactions are reinforcing these conditions. So if improvement is a choice, and those choices are influenced by what people feel, think, and know about the environment, then every one of those choices is feeding something back into the environment. And then over time, that starts to compound. Every dismissive comment, every unspoken assumption, every time someone gets shut down for speaking up, those are all inputs into this bidirectional feedback loop. If the inputs are mostly negative, people begin to learn that speaking up is maybe risky, that challenging something isn't worth it, or that it's easier to just work around the problem and not raise the issue to the larger group. And the good news is, though, that it works in the other direction as well. Positive choices also reinforce those conditions. So people start to see what gets supported. So what gets rewarded, they see what maybe becomes kind of the norm. And so when enough of those positive interactions happen across this bidirectional feedback loop, enough people, and when there's enough time, that's when it starts to also affect the culture in a positive way. So that's how the choices we make individually begin to shape the conditions we experience kind of collectively. So culture isn't something that we install. It's really something we continually create and reinforce through the choices that we make every single day. And so I want to kind of illustrate this a little bit. Everyone participates in creating the experience of work for someone else. It starts with that first choice. So that one interaction. And then that choice affects the person in front of you, but it also influences what everyone else around you sees as normal or safe or acceptable. And then you start to multiply that across the team, across the shift, across the day, and then eventually across the entire working environment. That's how individual choices and these competencies, these interpersonal competencies, start to start turning into the organizational conditions. And these interpersonal skills people bring into these moments, a lot of the ones that you kind of were mentioning, like listening skills and having empathy and curiosity, these interpersonal skills that people bring into those moments or those choices, they matter a lot. So strong skills tend to reduce friction and make better outcomes more likely. The interpersonal skill gaps do the opposite. They add friction, they weaken the interactions, and over time weaken the conditions around the work. So the point is that these individual moments don't stay individual. They accumulate and compound over time, either positively or negatively. So here's another way to look at it. One person makes a choice, and that choice affects the experience of the person on the other side of it. Then that person responds, and how you have an interaction, or that interaction affects the relationship between them, how they work together, and ultimately the environment that they're both contributing to. So what looks like a small moment between two people is actually part of how the working environment gets built and how that culture eventually gets created. And this led to the fifth realization. Leaders matter a lot. They shape the system. They set the expectations, they create the vision, they influence the structures people work within, but they aren't the system. And that was kind of the big realization for me. They aren't the system. Most of the moments that shape the working environment happen between coworkers across the entire organization. It happens across teams. It happens in the middle of the work itself, right? Leaders simply can't be everywhere. Those moments are happening. So if everyone is helping shape the conditions for continuous improvement, then the capability to improve those conditions can't live only with leaders or the change agents or the continuous improvement teams. It has to live where the work happens and where the friction is actually experienced. That was the point where it became clear to me that improvement had to become a distributed capability, not something the organization depended on a few individuals to drive. And so I started to realize that if we don't do that, that we're containing the opportunity for improvement. And so that was the fifth realization. Once I started putting all five of these realizations together, it changed the way I thought about the solution. If this is really how improvement happens, then the solution has to be designed around that reality. It can't depend primarily on leaders. It can't be isolated training
Ema,
or just giving people
9,
more tools.
lay down.
It has to reflect where improvement actually happens, how people influence one another, and who is shaping the conditions every single day. That was the big design insight for me and for the team I was working with. The architecture of the solution had to match the relational architecture of the improvement that we were trying to make. So these five realizations became kind of the design requirements for the Respect for People roadmap. So because people don't act on technical knowledge alone, the roadmap focuses on developing the relational skills that unlock the full potential of that technical dimension. So that was the first one. The second one, because improvement is a choice and each choice adds or reduces friction, we focused on strengthening the interpersonal competencies where those everyday choices are made. The third thing was because culture emerges from the choices and conditions everyone, if we talk about everyone every day, everyone shapes and experiences. We designed the roadmap to create the distributed capability needed for improvement to spread and compound across the whole system. And then because individual choices and competencies compound into conditions, we designed the roadmap to cultivate system awareness, helping people see how their patterns influence others and what they are able to build together collectively. And then finally, because leaders can't be everywhere, and culture, they can't be everywhere where culture is being shaped. We designed the roadmap to build shared agency, making improvement really a collective effort rather than a leader dependent or a continuous improvement team dependent, with everyone owning the conditions they collectively create. So these weren't just features we decided to add to the roadmap. They were really the things the roadmap had to be designed to do if it was going to help create the conditions for continuous improvement. So And so that was kind of the framework that we set out to build the Respect for People roadmap around. So just a couple of examples. We took a manufacturing company who went through this program, and within about 8 to 10 months, they were seeing a 26% increase in productivity, even before a single continuous improvement tool was introduced. So 100% of the employees went through the program. And so what happened? Well, they were collaborating better, they were solving problems better, they were organically engaging in more productive conflict. We did something similar with a government agency. It was over 200 employees reported into this call center. And there was a major transformation that happened, and that was the one team that remained proficient. And we did this with a retail organization as well. And so we've got real live case examples of how this work is actually creating productivity. I think with that, let me kick it over to Dan. I think you're going to kind of set us up for the next things that we're going to talk about.
Thank you, Scott. So if we come back to the question we started with, how do you actually know whether you're creating the conditions for continuous improvement? It's more than being able to point to the tools, the systems, the practices you put in place, as you've learned here a little bit so far. You can explain where those conditions are actually being created, which everyday choices and interactions are strengthening or weakening them, and where friction is really getting in the way. You also know whether people throughout the organization have the capability to make better choices where the work is happening without having to depend on a leader or a change agent to being there to facilitate that conversation. And ultimately, you see it in the results, less friction, greater participation in improvement that becomes easier to sustain and build over time versus what you might have now. That's when continuous improvement starts becoming a capability of the organization rather than something the organization has to keep pushing. So where we're going next is session number 2. We're going to start breaking the roadmap down into specific behaviors, as Scott shared a moment ago, that help people create these conditions in everyday work. Over the next several sessions, we'll move through the 3 core principles shown in sessions 2, 3, and 4. Engage with compassion, treat people like they matter, and partner for mutual benefit. And we'll take a look at the 9 behaviors and skills that sit underneath them. The goal is to make this practical. We'll connect each behavior back to the kinds of choices, interactions, and conditions we've been talking about today. And we'll show how they support stronger problem solving, better collaboration, and more consistent continuous improvement. And then we'll bring it all together around what it means to get better individually and collectively with session number 5. So this is where we're heading in the remaining few sessions. You can see the dates at the bottom of each session.
And you should have received a calendar invite for the remaining of our sessions. We'd also like you to do an assessment now between this time and our next meeting. It's a personal assessment, though. You've already done the organizational assessment, which gave you the opportunity to look at the conditions within your larger organization. Now we're going to turn the lens toward ourselves. And this assessment will give you a personal starting point. We're going to build on that when we come back together in the next session. So if you want to use that QR code to get to that assessment, I'll also put this link into chat so that you have it there. And I'll be sending it an email for you after our session today.
And Melinda, I think we're going to make these slides available as a PDF to people as well, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Scott. Yep. And we will also have the recording available so that you are able to see this again. So just in closing today, if you have any more questions about the roadmap, of course, we'll be answering those in upcoming sessions. But if you're very curious today and you want to learn more right away, here's a link to the Respect for People website where you can get some more information. And then I wanted to personally invite you, along with Dan, to our People and Lean Northeast Lean Conference. It's coming up in the end of September. It's at the Mass Mutual Center in Springfield, Mass. For those of you who are in New England and local, and also our friends across the country, we'd love to see you. So please join us if you can. One thing that really differentiates this conference from a lot of conferences is the connection, the personal community that you'll build while you're there. And you'll learn from a lot of those who are in positions just like yourselves, what they're doing in order to move forward and use AI in order to accelerate their continuous improvement journey. Are there any other questions that came up in chat? I'm just looking quickly here. We have time for a few. So Rosemary said, what happens to psychological safety when the bidirectional feedback loop becomes self-reinforcement? Forcing, obviously, this could be negative or positive. How does psychological safety become an emergent property, or is that something else?
No. So if we think about what psychological safety is, right, it is really that we have confidence that we can show up the way we need to show up, the way we're being asked to show up, and that there's not going to be a downside to that. And so that bidirectional feedback loop, if it's got a lot of negative inputs, then psychological safety probably isn't going to be there. There's not going to be a level of trust. There's not going to be a level of cooperation. There's not going to be a level of sharing. There's not going to be a level of appreciation or recognition. There's not going to be a lot of candor in that system. And so, how do you counter that? Well, the way you counter that is that you have to design the inputs into that bidirectional feedback loop. You have to start creating opportunities so that there can be more positive ones dropping into that bidirectional feedback loop. That's kind of the antidote really to that negative feedback, that negative loop, is you have to just have more positive ones. And so that's a little bit of what we've designed with this program is we're giving you kind of literally a roadmap or a recipe on what are those 9 things that people can be doing every day. And if they do these 9 things every day, you're going to then overwhelm that system with positive inputs, which is then going to create an environment where psychological safety can begin to emerge and be sustained.
Great.
We're going to talk a lot about that in the next sessions, I know.
Thank you, Scott. And we have a question from Amelia. How does this approach differ from the Shingo maturity assessment? Dan, maybe you can comment on that. The overall Shingo assessment considers both your systems as well as your behaviors. This is really looking at the fundamental behaviors and practices, those interactions. Feel free to add, Dan, if you'd like.
Can. So, this is a question I've been answering for myself as I'm learning more about the Respect for People roadmap, but I do see there's a difference. The Shingo maturity assessment, there's two types. One is for an organization challenging for the prize. So examiners will go in and assess the maturity of that system. And then there's the educational classes where we're doing something similar. In your organization, you're trying to look at behavior, you're trying to assess that behavior based, as Melinda said, based on the systems and tools we have in place. And we're trying to create those ideal behaviors as those Shingo Pioneers winners have. This is a little bit different in that it's trying to address the friction within the system. I think this is a really good question, and I'm looking at my clock. One example I shared with Melinda and Scott earlier was that I've been involved in many continuous improvement projects where there was a problem between two different groups or a problem between two different managers. They simply weren't getting along. And we applied systems and tools, lean systems and tools, and I led the effort, and we had success. The project was successful, even though there was a lot of friction within the two groups. When I left those organizations, I worried that it wouldn't sustain. I worried that the friction was still there. While the tools were successful, we hadn't really resolved the root cause of their problem. And when I was first asked to sort of arbitrate or mediate that project, it felt a little funny because I don't always do that with lean. This actually addresses the root causes. So it's going deeper. And we're going to talk more about it in the remaining sessions. I wish we had more time, but we are simply out of time.
And if I could just add one quick thing. So what you were the arbitrator, you were that leader that we were talking about is that fifth realization. And as soon as the leader goes away, then the arbitration goes away. And so what we're focused on is how do we create those interpersonal competencies, those interpersonal skills to address that root cause?
Great. We had success, and I summed it up as the tools guided the process, but obviously I was there. But yeah, we did not really address the major issue within the team. Therefore, I doubt CI sustained.
Well, everyone, I wish to thank you for joining us today and for all of your participation and questions. We will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you both. Thank you all. We'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.